Jack Nicklaus asked Brian Rolapp a direct question, and Rolapp didn't answer it. Not with anger, not with a scandal, just silence dressed up as diplomacy in a room full of players who all needed to know which way this tour is about to bend. Here's what should stop you cold. The man reshaping professional golf's entire future comes from the NFL, not golf, and the man asking him to explain himself built half of what the sport looks like today. So ask yourself, how does a conversation like this even happen? How does the most powerful commissioner in golf sit across from Jack Nicklaus and choose not to answer? That's the question this video is going to sit inside of. Not who's right, not who's wrong, just how did it get here? Before we go further, I want your honest take. Do you think Rolapp owed Nicklaus a real answer, or was staying quiet the smarter move? Drop your take in the comments. And if you want the full breakdown of what happened in that room, subscribe now, because this story isn't finished. Because this isn't really about one awkward moment at Muirfield Village. It's about two very different visions for what golf is supposed to be. Sitting in the same room, run by two men who've never had to answer to each other before. Nicklaus built his half over 5 decades. He fought for player control back when club pros ran the show, helped shape the tour into something players actually owned a piece of. Tradition isn't sentiment to him. It's infrastructure he personally laid down. Rolapp didn't grow up in that world. He spent his career at the NFL, learning how to turn a league into a product. Bigger events, tighter fields, more drama built by design. Now he's applying that exact playbook to golf, whether the sport's old guard is ready for it or not. One man wants the tour to remember where it came from. The other wants it to look like the biggest league in America. And somewhere between those two visions is every player on tour waiting to find out which future they're actually playing for. Only one of these two men gets to decide. And it isn't Nicklaus. It's Rolapp. Every theme, every track, every restructured season, that decision sits with him alone. Which brings us to the actual moment everyone's talking about. What Nicklaus asked him face to face, what Rolapp said back, and why golf insiders are calling it more telling than an actual argument would have been. But before I tell you exactly what he said, I want you to sit with this for a second. If you were Brian Rolapp in that room with Jack Nicklaus asking you to explain yourself, what would you have said? Drop your answer in the comments before you keep watching. I genuinely want to see what you'd have done in his position. And if you're new here, this channel breaks down the moments in golf nobody else is willing to slow down and actually explain. Subscribe now, because what Rolapp said next is the part nobody expected. To understand why his answer landed the way it did, you need to know what Rolapp's actually been building behind the scenes. Back in March, he laid out 6 themes shaping the tour's future. Track 1, roughly 21 to 26 elevated events, bigger purses, the best players competing against each other more often. Track 2, everything else, second-tier players will have to climb up into. Field sizes moving to 120 players with real cuts. Cutting out the small field, no-cut events entirely, and a postseason shakeup, possibly bringing match play into the mix for the first time. So it sounds simple. Track 1, Track 2, bigger purses, better drama. It isn't. Because buried inside those 6 themes is a much bigger question. One Rolapp has never directly answered. What happens to every player who doesn't make Track 1? What happens to the tournaments, the sponsors, the careers built entirely inside what he's now calling the second tier? That's the question sitting underneath everything Nicklaus asked him. And it's exactly the question Rolapp chose not to answer directly. So here's what actually happened at Muirfield Village ahead of the memorial. A reporter asked Nicklaus directly what he thought of the product Rolapp was building. Nicklaus started by saying he didn't want to comment on the schedule, then immediately did anyway. He said he wasn't in favor of what the tour was doing right now, and that cramming too many big events too close together was a problem that would only get worse if it wasn't addressed. Then came the part that mattered most. Nicklaus said he hadn't actually sat down with Rolapp yet, but that he wanted to, face to face, to ask him directly. That meeting happened days later, and by every account, it was cordial, polite, nothing blew up. Now, you can read that as respect for the process. Two men handling disagreement like professionals, no headlines, no drama. Or you can read it as a warning shot, an 86-year-old founding figure of this tour choosing his words carefully in public because he already knows exactly how much power the man across the table now holds. Because Nicklaus isn't the only one uneasy about where this is heading. He's just the only one with the standing to say it face to face. Justin Thomas has already said publicly that playing week after week inside this bunched-up schedule is brutally tough, and that plenty of players quietly agree with him. Not one voice complaining. A shared exhaustion nobody with real power has fully addressed yet. 3 players have said it publicly. Dozens more haven't yet, because here's the uncomfortable part of Rolapp's plan that gets less attention than Track 1 and Track 2. If the season stays packed into fewer months, with bigger fields and higher stakes, the players who don't crack the top track aren't just missing out on money. They're absorbing the exact burnout Thomas is describing, with none of the reward on the other side. Nicklaus is fighting for the sport's identity. The players still on tour are fighting for something closer to their bodies and their schedules. 2 different battles. Same man holding both decisions, and that's the part most coverage of this story completely skips. Stay with me, because what comes next changes who you actually think the villain is here. Quick gut check before we get there. Do you think Rolapp is genuinely trying to modernize a sport that needed it? Or is he steamrolling a tradition he never understood in the first place? Tell me where you land in the comments, and if this breakdown is actually helping you understand what's happening behind the headlines. Subscribe now, because the next part is where this story flips. Here's the flip. It's not really about whether Rolapp is right or wrong, because before he ever took this job, the Tour's own board was already searching for someone exactly like him, someone from outside golf, someone who'd built a business model around bigger events, tighter competition, and manufactured drama, the exact template the NFL has used for decades to dominate American sports. Rolapp didn't invent that pressure. He was hired specifically to apply it, which means every decision he's making, Track 1, Track 2, the field cuts, the postseason shakeup, isn't really one man's personal vision. It's the Tour's leadership deciding collectively that golf needed to start looking like the NFL to survive financially. Rolapp is just the person carrying it out. So is this actually about Brian Rolapp, or about a sport that was always going to end up here no matter who sat in that chair? Nicklaus isn't just questioning one CEO, he's questioning a direction the entire tour already committed to before Rolapp ever walked in the door, which is exactly why that meeting at Muirfield Village matters more than the headlines gave it credit for. Every report used the same word to describe it: cordial, polite, professional, the kind of word that makes a story sound finished. Cordial, they called it. Here's what cordial actually meant in that room. It meant an 86-year-old man who helped build this tour from nothing, sitting across from a CEO who's openly said he won't be bound by golf's traditions, and neither of them raising their voice, not because there was nothing to disagree on, because both men already understood exactly how this ends. Rolapp holds the authority now. Nicklaus holds the history, and history in this specific room doesn't get a vote. That's not a conversation between equals working things out. That's one man explaining a decision that's already been made, and another man deciding it wasn't worth the fight to have it out loud. Cordial wasn't peace. It was Nicklaus reading the room correctly. So let's go back to where we started. How does a conversation like this even happen? It happens because 2 men were never actually arguing about the same thing. Nicklaus was defending 50 years of infrastructure he helped build with his own hands. Rolapp was defending a plan he'd only been sketching out for a matter of months. 50 years versus a handful. That's the actual imbalance sitting underneath every polite word exchanged in that room. And that's why cordial was never going to mean resolved. Nicklaus didn't get a real answer at Muirfield Village because there isn't one yet. Not one Rolapp's ready to give publicly, and not one The tour's board has fully committed to either. So no, Rolapp didn't refuse to answer out of arrogance. He stayed quiet because the honest answer is still being written one policy board meeting at a time, which means this story isn't over. It's paused, and the next real answer might come sooner than anyone in that room expects. So here's where I'll leave it with you. Rolapp didn't refuse to answer because he had nothing to say. He stayed quiet because the real answer isn't his to give yet. It belongs to a policy board meeting that hasn't happened. But Nicklaus won't wait forever. Neither will the players still absorb a schedule nobody's fully committed to fixing. So tell me, do you think Rolapp eventually gives Nicklaus a straight answer, or does this stay diplomatically unresolved for years? Drop your prediction in the comments below, and while you're there, tell me where you're watching this from. Country, city, doesn't matter. I read every single one, and I'm always curious how far this actually reaches. If this breakdown helped you understand what's really happening behind that Muirfield Village handshake, subscribe now, because the next policy board meeting is coming. And when Rolapp finally does answer, you'll want to already know exactly what he's being asked.